the segment of the show called the Roundup Wrap, where we invite our resident journalist or analyst, Mighti Jamie, to talk to us about some of the stories highlighted earlier, as well as throw forward to the week ahead. Good morning, Jamie. How are you on this Monday?
Morning, Asanda. Morning to all the listeners and viewers. I'm very good, thank you.
Always great having these catch up sessions. I can't believe it's halfway through the month already. I don't know if you feel like this month is going at the pace that it should, but it feels so fast for me. And there's so much going on also
It
on our
is
continent.
so much is going on in South Africa, in the continent. The year is virtually over.
Mm. And let's start today then with the United States and Saudi Arabia and Egypt, as well as the United Arab Emirates. They've proposed a 3-month humanitarian truce in Sudan to be followed by a permanent ceasefire. So, in a joint statement, the foreign ministers of these so called Quad countries also called for a 9-month transitional period after the truce to pave the way for civilian led governance. Do you think this plan for a truce and transitional period is realistic?
Well, I think it's a rather ambitious plan in that they're calling for a 9-month transition period and then to move to civilian governance. Because if we were to think about what does this transition period look like, it would need to have some form of election if you're going to move towards a civilian government. So, in and of itself, I do think that the plan is rather optimistic. But the significant development here is that you have the foreign ministers of all of these countries, the US, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE, having this meeting. And they are considered to be the Quad countries because the narrative is that they are the most influential on the ground. And we can understand the different reasons why they would be. America as the world's largest superpower, also one of the countries with strong relationships with Saudi Arabia, which also funds Egypt and their military in terms of supplying them with arms. And we saw what role America had to play during the Arab Spring, in particular with Egypt. So when you have these four countries trying to come up with a roadmap, that is something that I think is rather significant because the question then becomes, will the different groups be defiant when their main funders or people who are supporting them in various ways? So, if you think about Egypt and Saudi Arabia, they're supporting the Sudanese army. If you think about the UAE, they've been implicated in funding the rapid support forces. So, there is some tension between these various nations in terms of what they are funding and their aims and objectives on the ground in Sudan. But the fact that all four of them were able to come together does create a pressure point, not only for the rapid support forces, but also, for the Sudanese army to kind of like try to find a way forward. So the other part of the challenge here is that the Quad nations are calling for civilian-led governance. The people who are fighting currently are leaders of different factions of the army, if you will. So you've got one person leading the national army and the other person leading the rapid support forces, both of whom do not have any aspirations or ambitions to hand over power to civilian governance. The people in 2019 were protesting for civilian government. That's what they were pushing for. But as things stand, the people who are fighting are military leaders. So part of why the plan seems overly ambitious is you're going to have two military leaders walking away from positions of power and authority. And we've already seen right now that the rapid support forces are basically making Darfur their, government base, and they're taking and consolidating more power in that part of the country. So I don't think that there's a realistic path which doesn't include some kind of power sharing between these two men and the civilian governance. So I'm not sure whether or not we'll see much progress. It's ambitious, it's optimistic, but the challenges on the ground are that the end goal of the Quad nations are not necessarily aligned with the end goals of these two military leaders, Asanda.
All right, let's go to the DRC. Judges in the war crimes trial of former DRC President Joseph Kabila have postponed their verdict until September 19. What reasons were given for this?
Well, it looks as if they're looking for new or going to consider new evidence. I'm not sure what that new evidence is. We're going to have to see what else is presented here. A very extraordinary measure has already been imposed in that a president or a former president is going to potentially face the death penalty. And that's something that they've been exempted from in terms of trying to facilitate transitions and trying to facilitate democracy, rather, because if you have a death penalty for political leaders, they're not likely to leave power if they are then, being forced out. So we're seeing a very unique situation here, where if they do find Kabila guilty and they say that he is indeed involved in treason and other charges, then they very well could link him. As being one of the perpetrators of the war that we are currently seeing between the military groups in the eastern parts of the DRC, as well as the government of the DRC. So right now, the state lawyers are saying that they want to present more evidence. I'm not sure what that evidence is going to be. I'm not sure why they may be postponing this particular verdict for these number of days. It may very well be that there's a political move behind the scenes, because as we know, the regional leaders have been trying to push for a resolution which is peaceful, and an execution of Kabila, a conviction of guilt for Kabila, would actually be an escalation. Right now, what we've been seeing them say on the side of the DRC government is that Kabila has been involved with the M23 groups, and that his presence in DRC, he was in eastern part of DRC for a short time. It's unclear whether he's still there. Is that he has been one of the people who's been pushing for the instability, for the chaos that has been ensuing in the eastern parts of the DRC, where the M23 has basically taken over Goma, Bukavu, and other regions. So we'll have to see what plays out as a result of this particular postponement. It's not a very long period of time. I think there will be an update that we can give the viewers and listeners by next week around what will have played out in the courts of the DRC around this very important case, Asanda.
State lawyers presented witness testimony linking Kabila to bank accounts allegedly used to fund the rebels. They asked that the treason charges be reclassified as espionage. How likely is this reclassification to happen?
It all depends on whether or not the courts accept this evidence as being compelling. One of the things we must keep in mind is that Kabila is being tried in absentia, so there is no audi alteram partem, so to speak, in that you get a consequence in the legal system, or an outcome in the legal system, where you question your accusers and where you can present either exculpatory evidence or countervailing evidence, or even dismiss the quality of the evidence which has been adduced. So right now we just have the version of the state lawyers. This could very well be a political trial. This could very well be fabricated evidence. It may very well be authentic evidence. We'll have to wait and see, because all of these things will then have a bearing on how the courts move. And I think the judges may be mindful of the international pressure, from the US, from the regional players, from China, and also the Kabila has strong relationships with a variety of global leaders, including some in the US and in China. And this may be leading to their reticence to just move ahead and find him guilty, considering especially that he's being tried in absentia, and that his legal team would not have had an opportunity to make representations and to actually question the quality and the credibility of all of the evidence that has been presented so far. We'll just have to wait and see where the court lies in terms of their reasoning when they come up with a judgment in this respect. It's a very peculiar case happening at a very peculiar time.
Mm. As you say, he's been tried in absentia. His whereabouts are unknown. He did, though, return briefly to the eastern city of Goma in April. Does that add any influence to this case at all?
Well, I don't know what it does to the case, but he may very well have been trying to rally some political support. He's from Goma, he's from that part of the country. And so it may very well be that Kabila is actually trying to re enter the political fray. In terms of African politics, he's relatively young, and you may find that he feels that he has unfinished business in the country. All of this, I think, will be it will be a story that unfolds much further, because he wasn't there for a long period of time. He may very well have been testing to see if he had a lot of stability and support there.
Let's move to Tanzania now. The Electoral Commission in that country has cleared opposition politician Luhaga Mpina to contest next month's presidential election. This follows a court ruling that overturned his earlier disqualification. Please remind us why Mpina was barred in the first place.
Well, I'm not sure why Mpina particularly was barred, but I know that the government of Tanzania has been acting very heavy-handedly against opposition leaders. If you recall, right now, the leading opposition party itself is not contesting this election. Their leader, Tunde Lissu, is under arrest, and we've seen a crackdown on social media, which seems to be favorable towards the opposition in any shape or form. So as things stand right now, Chama Chadema and their leader basically Samia Hassan, they are in a good, position to win this election, which is coming up, because everything that has happened this year has indicated that they're not really going to make a lot of space available for opposition leaders. So what we're seeing is rather an interesting development, is that the courts in Tanzania have actually, or the Electoral Commission rather, has actually allowed Luhaga Mpina to actually contest, but his contesting it's we have to take it with a pinch of salt, because as I've said already, we've seen other political parties being barred from contesting. So the reason why the leading opposition party in Tanzania is not contesting themselves is because they didn't sign, and they didn't sign the electoral code because they were protesting for more reforms. So even though they are not contesting and it's beneficial to the opposition as things stand, there is an argument around that, if they didn't sign the electoral code, then it's their own tactical choice which is backfiring on them. But it looks as if the election is going to continue. It looks as if there is going to be this opposition from this politician, but he's not necessarily the main player. And we are seeing that basically Chama Chadema is in a position to run away with this election.
Let's touch on Burkina Faso now. They have waived visa fees for all African nationals. The government has announced visitors must still complete an online application but will no longer pay the usual charges. What were the usual charges? How much does a tourist visa cost until now? And what does this move signal about Burkina Faso's Pan African strategy and regional ambitions?
Well, the tourist visa actually was rather expensive. It was going for $100,
Mm.
and the business visa was going for $165, which, if you were to convert that to rands, it's about 2,000 rands, close to, as well as close to 2,500 rands. But for the international, not the international, but the rest of the continent is very familiar with the US dollar value. So as things stand, this is a positive development, because it does show that Burkina Faso is aware that they need to improve African tourism, make it easier for people to access their country, because they are in a position right now where they do need to encourage, investment, and try to find alternative forms of investment, because they're not necessarily going to get it from France, they're not necessarily going to get it from America, and by implication, if they're not going to get it from those two nations, which are playing a leading role in the politics of their country, they're also not going to get it from the EU. So it does look as if they're trying to expand and actually show that they're thinking in terms of the African continental free trade area and the Pan-Africanist agenda, which does include free movement of people and easy movement of people. They're obviously stressing that you still need to apply for a visa,
Yeah.
but they're trying to remove these barriers. The biggest barrier to getting to Burkina Faso, though, remains the cost of flights.
Mm.
If you were to look at how easy it would be for someone from South Africa to get to Burkina Faso, you'd see that it's quite a complicated process, much more complicated than going to France, for instance, or going to the UK or any part of Europe at this particular point. So that's one of the things that they'll have to look at and
Okay.
see if they can get easier and direct flights from Burkina Faso to other, regional destinations.
Jamie, we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you again for your time and your valuable analysis, and I hope you have a great week.
Thanks for having me. I hope you have a great week too.
Thank you. That's our resident.